As many of you know, Larian Studios released Patch 5 for Baldur's Gate 3's early access just a couple weeks ago, and now I've finally put a good amount of time into it. In this video, I'm going to dive deep into some of these changes and talk about my personal experience with them, and I want you guys to put your thoughts below in the comments. This is how we help Larian develop the game in the best way possible, and they're obviously listening to community feedback. Quick shout out to 3 recent channel patrons, Anthony, Deltium, and Leda. Thank you guys so much for your support. Links to my Twitter and my Discord server will be below. Let's get right into it. The first thing I want to talk about is the new resting system, and I'll start off with mini camps. So now, when you're in specific areas of early access and you decide to take a long rest, you and your party will appear at a camp that looks similar to the environment that you were just in. For example, if you take a long rest in the Dank Crypt, you'll appear in a Shrine of Jurgle mini camp that very much resembles the Dank Crypt. If you take a long rest in the Owlbear Cave or the Zhentarim Hideout, your mini camp will be a cave that has similar geological formations as those 2 particular places. If you rest in the cave with the Phase Spiders, which is quite a different type of cave than the Owlbear Cave, you'll appear in a dark, wet, humid-looking cave. And if you take a long rest in the Underdark, you'll of course be resting in a beautiful, magical, mushroom-filled mini camp. So before patch 5, there was only one camp, and that was the river camp, and no matter where you were on the map, you would always appear back at the river camp for your long rest. And in my opinion, this was very, very immersion breaking, especially when you're down in the Underdark for hours, and then with a snap of a finger, you're safely back at the river camp. The river camp, however, still remains the headquarters camp and will be the camp that continues to grow as you make progress in the game. And many things will be present at the headquarters camp that will not be present in your mini camps, such as the tents, the workbench, Daddy Helson, shout out to Chubla, Scratch, and the Owlbear Cub, to name a few. The mini camps as of now will only have your storage container, which does link to all other camps, and everyone's favorite talkative skeleton.
Ah, yes.
Another thing that Larian did with the mini camps is allow them to still trigger most, if not all, of the important story dialogue cutscenes that took place at the river camp before. So going to a mini camp doesn't seem to make you miss out on anything story-wise, which is important. This obviously took a lot of work to implement and carry over all of these incredible cutscenes to new environments, and overall I'm very happy with mini camps. I'm also very happy that Larian is still keeping the river camp as the headquarters camp, because it is nice to have somewhat of a home to go back to and watch it grow and of course decorate. You'll still be going to the river camp more often than not, and if you want to go there instead of going to one of the mini camps, it's really not that hard to get yourself in an area that will allow you to rest at the headquarters camp. I'm assuming that on our journey through Act 2 and 3 that this will still be the case. In terms of negative feedback, I don't really have much for this, but the one thing that did stand out to me was taking a long rest in the Goblin Camp, which makes you appear at the Jurgle Shrine mini camp, which just doesn't make much sense. I'm fairly certain though that this is just a placeholder and will be updated with time. I am okay with some of the mini camps being clones of each other, such as the Owlbear Cave and the Zhentarim Hideout mini camp. Both those locations are in very similar environments, but it would be cool if they could distinguish them just a little bit from each other, but really it's not that big of a deal. So the addition of mini camps is pretty sweet, and I can't wait to see more of them, and I'm okay with them being just simple resting places. As for the headquarters camp, well, I like where it's at right now, and I do like where it's headed, but there's so many things that could be added that would make it an even more special place, and most of my ideas come down to camp customization. So maybe us players could move some of the tents around, change the colors of things, or maybe there's more items in the world that are specifically meant for decorating your camp. All of these things would make our camps unique from one another, and we would all take pride in what we're creating. I know I'm probably asking for a lot here, and it's not the end of the world if this doesn't happen, but this would be super, super cool, and I think a lot of you guys would love this as well. Now, the one thing that I do want, even if they don't add those other things, is I want a bookshelf where we can put the books that we collect into one place in our camp and not have to put them in the storage container. I don't think they have that yet. Do they have that yet? I don't think they do. So Larian Studios, give me a bookshelf for all the lore books so we can put them in one place and really talk about them. That would add a lot to my actual playthroughs. All right, now let's talk about the actual resting mechanics. Patch 5 has introduced camp supplies to the game, meaning you need certain items, which mostly consist of food, to be able to receive the full benefits of a long rest. Before Patch 5, nothing was required to complete a long rest. You simply click the button, click on the bedroll, and wake up fully powered. This can be fine in some games, but the D&D 5th edition classes are designed around the short and long resting system, meaning that they're balanced around it. And since Larian is using the same classes for the most part, it's important to consider this in your game's design, which just wasn't the case prior to Patch 5. The biggest issue that I had before Patch 5 was that because of our ability to long rest whenever and wherever we wanted, except a few places, this in turn severely hampered the value and importance of taking a short rest. Why short rest when you can just long rest and get more benefits? Some people might ask, well, why not just get rid of the short rest then? Well, like I said, the 5th edition D&D classes are designed around the resting system, and this goes for short and long rests, both having significance for many class features. For example, warlocks get their spell slots back with a short rest. Wizards get arcane recovery, and land druids get natural recovery, which allows them to regain some of their spell slots back with a short rest. Channel Divinity for the Cleric can be regained after a short rest. Fighters get their Second Wind healing ability back with a short rest, and the list goes on. The point is that the short rest feature has to have some significance to it, and it did have a little, but not really much. And if you're not going to have any significance behind the short rest feature, you might as well just take it out of the game, which is fine, but then you have to change all of the Baldur's Gate 3 classes that are designed around the short and long resting system for it to actually make sense. In DOS 2, the resting system I thought was fine because the classes are designed around that particular system. Baldur's Gate 3 is different. With Patch 5 though, players must now come up with 40 camp supplies to be able to receive the full benefits of a long rest, meaning getting all of their HP, class features, and spell slots back. And this can be achieved by using mostly food and, well, some alcoholic beverages, each of which have their own number value to contribute to reaching the 40 camp supply points that you need. Some foods are worth 1 camp supply, while others can be worth 20 each, like the sun melon. There's even an item called Camp Supplies, which gives you the full 40 points that you need with 1 item. And this item can be found and looted off enemies, but also bought at some of the vendors. Requiring us players to have resources, which are limited in the game, makes the choice to long rest have much more importance to it. You can no longer just spam it endlessly with no thought about it whatsoever. This in turn, of course, makes using the short rest feature, which requires no camp supplies, actually something that you should consider more often, and therefore gives more value to the classes that have features that benefit from using a short rest. Other trickle-down effects from this change include making cantrips, which are the spells that don't require spell slots to use, much more important and useful. Health potions now have more value. The food that you pick up has a lot more meaning to it. Gold has more value because you might need to buy camp supplies, and your actual brain has more value placed on it because now you have to somewhat actively manage your spell slots, and of course your camp resources. Now I will say that I personally haven't had any problems managing my camp supplies yet. Every time I've needed a long rest, I've had an ample amount of food at my disposal that I had previously found and sent to my storage container. Solving this is where it might get a bit tricky in terms of how much of a challenge should this provide, and also what type of players even want this challenge. If camp resources are too abundant and always extremely easy to find, then the whole process starts to lose some of its importance and kind of becomes how it was before, something you can spam without much of a thought. I think the solution to this could be found in the game's difficulty level, which we currently don't have access to any difficulty levels in early access. So with harder difficulties, supplies might become more scarce, or you could simply raise the camp supply requirement for a long rest and not even have to remove any food from the game. With that said, I also want to point out that even with it still feeling a bit easy in its current form, In my opinion, the fact that I know that these resources are finite, that they're limited, this in turn has caused me to play a little differently in this playthrough than I did in previous playthroughs. I'm more cautious and mindful of what I'm doing. I'm definitely using more cantrips, and most importantly, I find myself using the short rest feature. It's also important to mention that Larian has said that the amount of required camp supplies for a long rest is going to increase at further levels, and just knowing this has caused me to not want to waste things, because as a new player to patch 5, I really have no idea if food may become more scarce later in the game, and then I'll end up regretting using it all up in Act 1. Now don't forget that if you don't have any camp supplies, you can still do what's called a partial rest, which will restore up to half your spell slots and hit points. So if you do find yourself running out of supplies, or if you just don't want to use the supplies, you can do a partial rest and get some of your power back. You're never completely screwed. And I really don't have a problem with this as of right now. It seems pretty fair. And that'll be it for the resting system. Let me know what you guys think below. That's a very, very important system to this game. All right, next up, we're going to go over enemy AI improvements, active roles, disengage, the new shove mechanics, and background goals. So the enemy AI improvements were definitely noticeable. With patch 5, the enemies were making use of the dash action much more and really closing in on that distance on us. I saw them throwing potions at each other, picking up weapons off the ground, and all sorts of stuff. All of this is great, but they are still far from perfect. I think over the course of early access, Larian Studios will continue to improve the AI as we report our problems. It's not in a horrible state right now, especially considering how far away the game's launches, but there's still a lot that needs to be fixed. Now don't be afraid to make the game do weird stuff while you're playing. That's what early access is for. I noticed that when I decided to pull Dror Ragzlin, Minthara, and Priestess Gut all into one combat encounter, link to that fight will be below, some of the AI went pretty stupid. Dror was very undecided about what his actions were going to be. Some of the goblins were running into walls, etc. I also decided to call in the ogres on the minotaurs and the underdark, but I also decided to back my party away and let the ogres and minotaurs duke it out. It was a really fun fight to watch, but this did cause some issues pertaining to where I called in the ogres, because I called them in while standing on a mushroom, and the minotaurs at the end had no idea what to do with the last ogre standing on a mushroom, so they didn't do anything. The new active role system, I don't think anyone is really complaining about. What a beautiful user interface we now have. The animations are fun to watch, and being able to see the difficulty class as opposed to the target number is very much appreciated by D&D players, and I think in general, just watching the bonuses your character has being applied in front of you rather than behind the scenes just creates a much more engaging role system. The quality of life improvements of allowing us to apply spells before the roll by simply clicking a button made life much easier. It was kind of a pain switching to a different character to cast a spell that you forgot to cast, and so on. The only problem that I really have is that it feels like I rarely fail anymore. And it might be weird for some of you guys to hear that, but the ability checks feel much easier now. And this in turn has taken some of the thrill and suspense of the outcome of the die out of the game a little bit. Maybe it's just me, and maybe I'm getting lucky on this playthrough, but I think I would like the difficulty class number to be raised a bit higher on some of these ability checks. Attack rolls now were a whole nother story. I've never missed more than I have on this patch 5 playthrough. Before I go on to the next topic, I do want to mention that background goals have given us a lot more inspiration points, which makes it easier to succeed on rolls. So I think they have to kind of balance this a little bit, since many of us have so many inspiration points now. Maybe they make the difficulty class a little bit higher to balance that out, because I definitely noticed that I hardly ever failed on my ability checks. I even romanced Shadowheart in patch 5, and that's 400 hours in the making. Disengage and jump have now been separated as their own actions, which I think is something most players are okay with. It just didn't make much sense to have to do the jump animation when wanting to disengage from your opponent. The part of this that might be a bit divisive though is Larian turning disengage into an action like it is in D&D, rather than it being a bonus action like it was before with patch 5. And jump no longer serves as a way to disengage. You'll have to take an opportunity attack if you want to jump away from an enemy. In my opinion, this is an excellent change, and now disengage is much more serious, and it's something something that you really have to think about because you're giving up your action to do it. Disengage is supposed to be a get out of jail thing, not an everybody gets to do it every turn without really sacrificing anything. The way it was prior to patch 5, you never really had to think much about your positioning because you knew you could always just jump away at only the cost of your bonus action and then still deal damage in that same round with that character. With it being an action, I now find myself much more focused on my character's positioning and really trying to keep my ranged characters out of melee reach from enemies. If I find myself in a situation where I have to disengage, I now feel a little bit of punishment for maybe not positioning myself well, or I find myself respecting the enemy's choice to try to put me in that position. Disengage has real weight to it now. Disengage costing an action also shines a bit of a spotlight on the rogue class.
My name's Astarion.
Because the rogues can use cunning action disengage, which allows them to disengage at the cost of a bonus action, which everybody got to do prior to patch 5. Now this is a rogue thing, and for it to mean anything, it should only be a rogue thing. We can't make everything easy for every class because it takes away some of the class's specialties. Next up is not being able to get advantage from Backstab anymore. Prior to patch 5, you could simply walk any of your characters around to the backside of an opponent, and this would give you what Larian called at the time Backstab, which in turn gave you advantage on your attack. This not only just doesn't make sense from a combat standpoint, because you shouldn't be able to move to the backside of your opponent on every single attack without risking anything, but it also took away from other ways that actually make sense in giving the ever so valuable advantage. If you're a melee character and you can get advantage on almost every single turn like we could before, then all of the other ways of getting advantage don't matter much anymore. This change to take that away may hurt a little for those of you who got into the habit of doing it, which was smart. I did it myself, but it's a necessary change in my opinion. It never should have been in the game in the first place. What they could consider trying out is the 5e variant rule of flanking. This will give your character advantage on their attack if your opponent is threatened by another friendly character on the opposite side of them. And this makes much more sense in terms of combat reality, because an opponent defending themselves against two characters in melee range would have a hard time dodging or reflecting those attacks. Let me know what you guys think about Larian trying this out, because it can also be a divisive rule in the D&D community. Another idea to possibly try out is allowing a character to get advantage from attacking from the backside like they did before, but in order to get to your opponent's backside, you have to risk an opportunity attack. I'm not sure if that would be a good change or not. I'm just kind of throwing some ideas out there, but I will say that I'm certainly happy that they at least changed the way that it was initially. Next up pertains to shoving enemies. As many of you have pointed out, including myself, shoving enemies off high places felt a bit overpowered to say the least. Many of us have asked for shove to require an action instead of a bonus action, but Larian didn't do this. Instead, they just made it harder to shove, and to be honest, this might be a decent solution. Shoving an enemy is now based on the target's weight and the caster's strength. I definitely noticed a nerf to being able to shove my way to an easy victory on most fights with patch 5. Strength characters will be the ones that can really shine here, and this is how it really should be. Gal shouldn't be shoving heavy enemies 20 feet away from him. I'm sure the shove system will still require some tweaking, but I think this is a step in the right direction and possibly even a decent solution, dare I say. Let me know what you guys think about it below. And lastly, I don't have to talk about this much because I think almost everyone is enjoying it, and that is the added background goals. Depending on your character's background, when you do certain things in the game that fit your character's background, such as being a folk hero and saving people, or being an acolyte and successfully reading the Book of the Dead Gods, you will be rewarded with an inspiration point. It's a nice added touch that gives your background some importance, and it's a lot of fun to try and figure out ways to get those inspiration points. If you already have the max of 4 inspiration points, you'll then start gaining XP from completing these background goals. I really like this system, but once again, getting all these inspiration points has made the ability checks really easy, at least on my playthrough, so that's something to think about balancing in some way, shape, or form. And that'll be it for today's video. Big shout out to those of you that have made it to the end of the video. That is the most important thing that YouTube takes into account for a video and a channel's success. So thank you guys so much. Obviously, I left out a lot of other changes that came with patch 5. Make sure to check out the notes. It really was a massive patch, even though we didn't get much in terms of content like new classes, subclasses, or races. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you ended up enjoying this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I do all sorts of content on this channel, ranging from live streams to game reviews to game tutorials to lore videos. Shit, man, I told you every time I can't remember this part. I'll catch you guys on the next one.